Hello, everybody. And, I'm just trying to get everything right on my screen. One of these days I won't just be like fussing with things when we go live, but it is not that day. Welcome to another episode, meeting, whatever we've decided to call it, of the Coffee Klatch. Today I am drinking out of my Mary Poppins mug. It's like the little bird umbrella from Mary Poppins. But I have tea in here today.
I have my Taurus sign mug, which I think my mom got me. It says clever, stubborn. I don't know why. Should have bought
On brand. On brand.
But we're not in Taurus yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, that's true.
We're into April.
Yep. Your birthday and my son's birthday are very close together.
Yeah.
My one child that's not born in December. Fun times. So today we're talking about basically story inspiration and kind of what inspiration we use when we write, because I think that's probably the question that I get asked the most is what inspires your stories?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely the question that people ask the most. So we figured we would pontificate on that for a while.
I'm going to share, so you're going to have to pontificate for a minute while I type to share this.
But you were the one that had the most, like, pontificating prepared.
Just pontificate for a second so I can type.
Okay, I'm talking while Nicole types. So yeah, I think when we do open things up for questions, often that is the question that I think most writers get asked is what inspires our stories. And I think what you will find during this talk is that, like, the very short answer is what doesn't inspire a story idea. Like, nothing is safe. No moment is safe. No personal triumph or tragedy is safe. I believe it was Deanne Gist who won a Rita a couple of years ago and said in her speech, I don't actually know what I'm feeling right now, but I know how I would write a heroine feeling in this moment. And that was the most real thing that anyone has ever said.
That's amazing.
Yes, because I was like, I feel that keenly.
Yeah.
That sometimes if a moment is a little bit difficult, I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to think about how I would write a character handling this. So that says a lot about how I cope in general with life.
Yeah, I have never thought of it that way, but that is a fantastic way.
Hi, I hope I said your name right. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some books I couldn't tell you what inspired them. Like, it was just an idea, or if it's a series, whatever. There's like no interesting background to it whatsoever. But I have based a lot of books, especially in terms of setting, on places that are special to me, or different things that are like real-ish. And then you put them in your writer brain and they become fiction. Because even things that inspire you, like, you never...
Yeah, that's very true.
Nonfiction.
I think that's kind of the funny, like... The funny thing is that I think everything does come from somewhere. Like, there's germs of ideas come from places, but by the time it becomes an actual book, it can be so far removed from that initial, like, idea that you had that it's so hard to walk it back and remember where it came from.
And we write a lot.
Yeah.
So some things just get lost in the other of moving on to the next book. But one of my first series was my Anti-Simplite series, which was a series I wrote for Samhain, which no longer exists. So they don't look like this anymore, but this is what they used to look like. And I mentioned this when we talked about family, that those books are based on my grandpa's airport. Like, that is the setting. The people and everything that happens in them are completely fictional, like 1,000,000%. There is nothing that happens in those books that actually ever happened. However, just the setting, like the buildings, the idea of an antique airfield, are all what I used as my setting for that series. Because that's like one of my special places. So that's what I used. And that's true of me for a lot of series. I'll set it in a place that in some way means something to me one way or the other.
Yeah. I think if I was going to give like the most concrete story that I have for, and we've alluded to this, I feel like a couple of times in our posts, is that the most concrete story that I have off the top of my head about inspiration is, gosh, that was like 3 years ago now, wasn't it? That my kids were like binge watching Sophia the First. And it was summer. It was a long time ago. It was summer, and it was one of those things where like, you know, they're bored. I think it was a year that we were having wildfires, so like no one could even go outside. It's like 100 degrees and the weather quality is bad. So I just remember like the kids were for sure stuck inside, and it was like Sophia the First all day, every day. And I was texting you and I was like, I've never been so irritated in my life. And you were like, I hate that show. It's terrible. Like your kids had already been through the Sophia the First thing. So you were like coming from an angry space. And you said, I was like, why is she a princess? How did it even happen? I want to know the story. And, you know, you said, and then there's like, you know, she was an ordinary girl and she goes to the palace and there's that weird sexual tension with the stepbrother. And you said, write me that presents. And I was like, okay. And so his Forbidden Pregnant Princess, I believe it's called, and I'm going to look that up and verify it. I know that's terrible, but like I have so many books with variations of like pregnant and princess and whatever in the title. Hi, Katie. Thank you. And I am sorry if I've like missed some of your greeting comments. Some of them are popping up on my screen and some of them I miss. Oh yes, his Forbidden Pregnant Princess. And I did name her Sophia. And that was squarely based on Nicole daring me to basically write Sophia the First fan fiction as a presents, and I did. So you have an ordinary girl who became a princess and ends up with with her stepbrother, who is the king. So there you go. I was also dared once. So actually, I can remember books I've written on dares. Isn't that terribly like unartistic?
But those are the most fun ones because they're so out of left field. I mean, for us, especially category authors,
yes,
the most fun is to go the most out of the box and just over the top because you write so many, and that's really where you can just do all the things that you've always wanted to do, really.
It's true. And I think because there are like, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
So sorry about the Sophia. Now I have the theme song stuck in my head.
No.
At least my kids are over that one. But yeah, so one time I got dared by like my initial kind of writers group, like back before I ever sold, and this eventually became my second book. They said, you know, you write so many virgin heroines. Can you do like a virgin divorcee, a virgin widow? Like, could you do a pregnant virgin? And I was like, challenge accepted. And so that became a mistake, a prince in a pregnancy, or I believe it's an accidental birthright in the United States. So that book, which was actually my best-selling book for years and years and years and years, was totally written on a dare. And so I do love that. And and I have a virgin widower, which was actually based on a dare from Elizabeth Hoyt and the late Paula Graves, who wrote for Harlequin Intrigue, and a conversation that we had on Twitter. So yeah, I remember the ones that I was like challenged to write. And that book's called A Royal World Apart. That was my first virgin widower. I've actually written 2.
I'm surprised that's not in your bio.
I feel like it should be. How many, like, as somebody else written 2 virgin widowers? Stephanie says, my husband proposed to me in a cemetery because my best friend died my senior year of high school, and when I would talk about her, I was always sad about the things she would miss, So in a way, she got to be there too. Oh, now you're gonna make me
Oh,
cry.
sweet! Oh my god!
Oh, we're fragile. Don't.
We're stuck inside. Don't do it.
I know. Oh, that's very sweet.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
So, to move back to humor where I feel more comfortable.
Much more comfortable. Emotions flux.
So,
romance writers.
When I wrote Rebel Cowboy, I have all my books right here. So this was Rebel Cowboy, which is actually my first single title, my first non-category, non-digital only book. My first book in stores. Well, I guess some of my super store, but anyway. For starters, the only reason I wrote that book was because I was trying to sell single title, and I was writing a lot of farmers and Midwestern types, as I want to do. And Macy's suggestion was, you could just write a cowboy. It's not that different.
I think I said, why do you hate money?
Well, yeah, but I wasn't going to say that part.
I know, it's terrible, but oh my goodness.
Anyway, I wrote a cowboy because Macy basically told me to, which is actually not true because I'm not very good at taking direction unless, it might make me money.
I was going to say, you have to want to. You can certainly take a suggestion.
I will take a valid suggestion.
Yes.
After complaining about it. But also in that book, so the whole llama situation, which then carried through all 6 books set in this town, was because, and I don't remember how this conversation started. I only remember that it was the conversation that made it so. Was we were somehow talking about my book and Napoleon Dynamite.
I forgot that.
Napoleon feeds a llama some ham. And I don't really remember how that started, but I was basically like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to have him feed a llama some ham. And I was very, it was a joke, but at the same time, I was very seriously going to slide that in there. Except then it became much bigger than I ever anticipated. As I decided to just make him a llama farmer, or ranger. But he does feed the llama some ham.
The llama's name is Mystery, for those of you who don't know, because Mystery Llama.
It was a mystery llama. It just appeared out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that fondly because it's strange, and llamas have become something of my brand.
This is true. They have, and I believe the whole farm animal thing has grown exponentially, and you've carried it over into your intrigues, which I think is quite admirable to have farm animals in the romantic suspenses, especially on the level you just achieved and the one that no one here has read yet, but I have.
Yes, and I think that's the first one where I've had some farm animals have an actual presence in the book. So that won't be out till 2021. I like a farm animal.
Yes. Chastity said some nice things about us and cowboys, and she said she's going to read the latest book she got from BJ Daniels, Dolores Fawcett, and Lori Wilde. BJ had a book out last week.
Yeah.
I love her covers.
I know, her covers are so great.
They're amazing. And her bookmarks. She's always got neat, the flat cowboy bookmarks. I love them. Oh, you have them, huh?
I have one on my thing.
Yay. They're so cool.
He was also on my cover.
That's funny. Is that Jesse?
I don't think so, actually.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay. I know we've all had him on 100 covers. He's great though. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think now that we're talking about this, I'm just thinking about things that I would say that my primary source of inspiration, other than Disney movies, which honestly, I will admit, I have written several different retellings of Beauty and the Beast, especially in presents. I don't know that I've really done one in the cowboy books, although many things borrow elements from it. I feel like maybe the one that I just wrote is a little bit Beauty and the Beastie. But news stories that news stories that make me very sad are like my primary source of inspiration for romance novels, which I know sounds weird. But the reason for that is I always say that I'm a control freak in a world that I cannot control. And so I'm always like, well, this poor person, like they had this thing happen to them, and what is he going to do now? And actually, like, A Tall Dark Cowboy Christmas was inspired by a news story I read a couple years before I actually wrote the book. And that was kind of based on, and like, it's completely not at all like the story that it ended up being. Like, this is a great example of like how something gets in your head and then you turn it around and it becomes a book and it becomes something totally different. But, there was kind of a famous story about this woman who had come to Oregon, which is where I live, from California because of our specific like right to die laws. And so she was terminally ill. I know it's a sad story, but she was terminally ill. The husband moved with her here and they were on the cover of all these magazines. And then at the same time, so that stuck in my head was like, he's now been on the cover of all these magazines. He is famous for the fact that he is going to lose his wife. That is literally what he's famous for, is this like terrible thing that's happening. I mean, and so I was thinking about that. And then I saw a couple of stories and I feel like these pop up a lot. Like the guy who marries his high school sweetheart right before she dies, like high schoolers that get married because one of them's dying. And I'm like, that's so crazy to me that you would become like fodder for other people, like through this really tragic thing, and like what happens to the person that's left behind. And so a little bit with Grant, he became kind of the inspiration for that person. Like if you were, and theirs is less like globally famous and more just like him and his wife were this like legendary small town couple that he went with her, and he was considered great and noble and wonderful because he had married her, and like he's defined by this terrible thing that happened and what everybody else thinks about it. And so that was kind of the jumping off point for his character. I know we're telling sad stories today. And so, yeah, that was where that started, because I wanted to know, how does somebody move on from that and find hope? And I think that's always what I'm doing. So it's like, I'm not really focusing on sad stories so much as wanting to take it and say, how does a person then find hope after something bad happens? Because I believe that's kind of primarily what we're doing with romances in general, is answering that question of how do people heal and how do they find love and hope and self-worth and all those things. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, like, a happy story, there aren't a lot of what ifs when you read a happy story or you see one or whatever. And with those tragedies, unfortunately, there's a lot of what ifs. And if you're a writer, like, what ifs are kind of what spur you on. And I found, especially, you know, at the beginning of my writing career, that I very much the same way. It was like, well, like, how could a person survive this horrible, horrible thing? And then I wanted to write them surviving that horrible, horrible thing, and figuring out how to be like happy on the other side of it. Although I can't really think of like any specific story. Yeah. I'm sure I had one at one point.
I know that one's like the most specific one I have, just because it took me like 2 years to get around to writing it, because I was like, I knew that I wasn't going to write that exact thing, but there was something about it that like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this now. Stephanie says, we were on It's a Small World at Disney World last year. The little boy sitting behind us had a little cowboy hat on. He was adorable. I turned and commented how I loved his cowboy hat. My daughter, who was 14 and can be very sarcastic, pipes in very loudly, yeah, my mom loves cowboys in her romance books. The other mother and I chuckled.
Don't we all?
That was, there was a lady behind my daughter and I went to Disney World, like, honestly, thankfully, with my daughter in January, and with my mom, and we were at like Mickey's PhilharMagic, standing in the like thing to get in, and the lady behind us was wearing a Baby Yoda shirt, and that was like before like the merch wasn't readily available at that time. My daughter's obsessed with Baby Yoda. I mean, who's not? And she, you know, she was like, oh, Baby Yoda, and like, you know, said something to the lady, started talking to the lady about her shirt, and she was like, I love that show. And I said, yeah, it's a good show. I said, you know, I like personally, I was more into The Witcher for other reasons. And she was like, yes, well, could talk about that for a long time. I like that one too. So connecting with strangers over Baby Yoda and Henry Cavill. Oh, Stephanie says, my neighbor who was widowed young lost her sister the same year and then married her sister's widow a few years later, and they've been married for over 15 years now. Wow.
There's a lot of like romance novels, I feel like, with that, like the brother-in-law, sister-in-law trope, I guess you would call it. I always find that that's a lot of like emotional stuff to weather. So it's good fodder for.
I will say I have started to write that a few times, and the reason that I haven't done it is because it grosses you out.
I can't read it. I've read it. Oh no, actually the one time I was thinking of it wasn't sister, it was best friend. Yeah, it doesn't work for me. I mean, I guess it's because I wonder if it would be as bad if it was like, so I have sisters. So I have a brother-in-law and a boyfriend-in-law. I don't know. My sister's boyfriend. But so like, it's too, like, you can put yourself in, no. But if it was gender flipped so that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I feel like that, yeah, people with sisters have a lot of opinions on that. Like, because then when it's the sister's husband, it's weird. And like because you're not the only person that said that to me. I don't have sisters. And so I actually feel like that matters. Now I have brothers-in-law and find the idea of falling for one's brother-in-law not at all, like, not a fantasy that I have. So I have two brothers-in-law, and no. But I know it did, but I'm like, but like, I love it. Like, I love it in theory. Do you know what I mean? Like, if somebody tells me that story, I'm like, oh, that's so romantic. But then when it comes down to like getting into it, I did do, my widow and widower stories are always my Christmas books. Don't at me. And so when I did Cowboy Christmas Redemption, which is actually based on another like real life tragedy, and I'm not going to get into it here, because I've already bummed everyone out. But unfortunately, my inspiration's like sad. But he was the best friend of her husband, and that's as far as I went with it. Was like the husband's best friend. Which was kind of sticky and fun in that way, but you stay clear of the like family connections that are alienating for some people. Yes. So anyway, I'm trying to think if I have any like really funny inspirations. I think like most of those have been more like challenges.
Yeah.
Because I think we kind of do that to each other a lot, like write this crazy thing, or like we've talked about before that Cowboy for All Seasons came out of a totally light, non-serious conversation. Like we were just messing around, and the new one, Good Old Fashioned Cowboy, which
will be out next year.
Yeah.
Which we haven't written.
No, we haven't written it yet. But the idea for it actually did come out of two things. Like, one is just that like online dating is such a thing, and you see it in pop culture a lot. Like you see it in books, you see it in movies, and like actually all of us the four of us who've been married or with our husbands for a very long time, like all four of us have been. So Jackie wins that one, and then you and me and Caitlin have been with our husbands for close to the same amount of time, and so we're like, gosh, what does dating even look like now? I mean, I never dated, so I don't really know. I just magically got married, but like now we're like a friends to lovers. So honestly, Chastity has the same mug, Nicole.
Taurus power.
Yeah. I'm a Pisces. I've heard I'm un-Piscean, but I don't know what that means.
I don't
either. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I don't know enough about Pisces. I don't have any Pisces in my life.
You don't, except me.
Well, that's what I mean.
Wow. I have a lot. I collect Tauruses, conversely, which I find interesting. But anyway. Anyway, another side note. But no, I was saying like I totally forgot what I was saying. Oh, yeah, good old fashioned cowboy. Just the idea of dating now, and like how people do it on apps and stuff. And like my brother met his wife online. And like they like an online dating thing, not like they met online long distance relationship. They knew they were local. Like they met on a dating site, like right before there were apps, because it was like 4 years ago. And so it's like that's so normal now. And like, see, Pisces rock, woohoo. And I think like the idea of that like horrifies me. And so I think, I was like, I like the idea of like doing an anti that, like the anti kind of technology, the anti dating thing. So that's where the concept of these women not being able to use their phones came into play, was like to go the opposite direction and like give you escapism from what is kind of the reality of dating now. And then, the other thing that kind of dovetailed with that was I had just seen online, and I've seen them before and read them, the kind of 50 ways to land a husband.
From like the 30s or whatever.
Yeah, from the 30s, 40s, those from women's magazines. And they're so hilarious and so outdated and so fantastic. And so we just got, we were kind of inspired by those things. And from there are building a book. We will all be working on that next month.
Yeah.
I'm excited to do that. A lot of video chatting will be going on. So yeah, I think inspiration just comes from all kinds of weird places, and it mutates so many times over the course of it that then years later you're like, why did I write that book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't always remember. I do have a few more where I have specific things. Of course, I pulled one and I already forgot why. I don't know. Maybe I'll come back to it. But my first, or no, not my first. One of my super romances, All I Have, which was actually the book I first sold to Harlequin, but in a twist of fate, it's not my first super romance. But so that's set on a farm, and there's like a couple. Well, there's a couple pieces of that book that are very like came from a very personal place for me. I actually dedicated that book to my grandpa because he had a farm. Like my dad was born when they lived on the farm, and then when my dad was a kid, they moved into town, which is like a town of not very many people, but they didn't live on a farm anymore. But a few years after, or I don't know how long after he sold the farm to his friend sold him the house and like an acre around the house back, because it was the house like his family had built like in the 1800s, and like his generations had lived there. So when we would go visit, we would like, one of the things we would do, go out with him to the farmhouse and like just truck around this old house. And by the time I was old enough to like really remember, like the house was falling apart, and it was kind of sad, but that was like my grandpa's favorite thing to do, was go putter around the farmhouse. He had like an old crappy piano out there, and he would play the piano by himself, or like fix things and stuff. And anyway, like my grandma really hated it because she likes things to look nice, and for lots of reasons, like it really bothered. And he was not very in good physical, like he was always very mentally healthy, but not always in very good physical health. He had a lot of back and neck problems, so he probably shouldn't have been out there alone. And I think that was part of why she didn't really like it. But one time when she was complaining about him going out there, he told me, he was like, I know she doesn't like it. And my grandpa was a very, like, the sweetest guy I've ever known. He always wanted to make people happy. So this is one of the few things he did that did not always make everybody happy. And he said, well, it's my heart. He's like, that place is my heart. And that always really stuck with me. And so my dedication in that book is like to my grandpa, and I gave Dell your heart. I'm like, I don't know.
So your goal is to make me cry today.
It is. I'm not done yet. But anyway, so I gave, so the house in my head in that book is my grandpa's farmhouse, much nicer looking. But there's also a scene in that book, and I wrote that book, it's 2020. I wrote that book like 7 years ago, I think.
Wow.
If not more. And there's a scene in that book that sticks with me because like I base it on So basically, Dell and Mia are the main characters, and they talk about what their farms mean to them. Because, like, basically, they're both trying to keep their farms afloat. And kind of in my area, like, suburbia is taking over all the farmland. So it's a very real threat that you'll, like, get this really great amount of money offer for your family farm and, like, not be able to turn it down. So anyway, so that's the big challenge of that book. And they're talking about why their farms mean so much to them. And I think it's Dell, maybe it's Mia, who tell a story that was kind of based on something that happened to me. And they talk about how, like, they're in their house, it was Mia, a part of the house that, like, wasn't used anymore. And they just felt like there was more there than just them. Like, it wasn't, like, not ghosts, but just this feeling that something was bigger, because, like, in my grandpa's case, like, that was, like, generations of his family that had lived in this house. And so, like, one time we were all there and he was telling stories, and it just felt like it's not a ghost thing. It's not totally a woo-woo thing, but you can just kind of feel the generations or the history or your connection to it or something. And, like, I had to leave the house and, like, go cry in the yard by myself because I don't like people see me cry. But, like, that was, like, a big moment for me. And so that I put that into that book. And that book means a lot to me because of all the farm stuff and stuff like that. But yeah, so, like, there were some specific things that even, like, years later, like, I remember specifically putting that scene in the book on purpose because that was a thing that happened to me, which is very rare. I don't know that I can think of too many other scenes I have written like that. So that was, like, a special inspiration to me.
Fun fact, that was the first book of yours that I read.
Yes, that.
And I loved it. So that book is, like, the foundation of our friendship.
It is.
That and a meme about raccoons that I will not get into here. It all comes back to raccoons.
Great.
Well, that's another thing. Like, this is a lighter. I'm trying to pull out, like, a great personal story like that, but right now I'm just thinking about nonsense. My former editor at HQN, who has since left the company, but she's the one who bought my first cowboy book for HQN. She bought the first Copper Ridge book. She loved animals, and then ironically, she did not edit this book because she left the company. But she was like, when the character of Beatrix popped up in the series, she sent me a picture of a kitten who was tiny and whose legs didn't work, and they made him a wheelchair out of macaroni. So the kitten had, like, a macaroni wheelchair, and she was like, or it was a Lego wheelchair, and the kitten's name was Macaroni. I think that was it. Anyway, whatever. It was this little kitten, and he had a little Lego wheelchair, and she was like, will you write, like, because Beatrix rescues animals, can you, like, write, something like that? And so I was like, I'll totally write, like, a kitten in a Lego wheelchair. And then B rescues Evan, an untamed cowboy who's a baby raccoon, and names him Evan. And then Evan was basically the only animal that I could ever see. So Lego wheelchair kitten became panty-stealing raccoon. Who tears
funny, like, there are those tales of, like, failed inspiration too, where you're like, I am going to do this thing, and I'm based on this thing, and then it, like, either never happens or it becomes, a cat becomes a raccoon or something like that.
I hate that because you're like, I thought I was writing this one book and it won't do the thing that it was supposed to do, and then it just becomes its own beast, and I spend, like, half the time trying to fight it. Yeah, Team Evan. The whole Evan thing spawned an entire raccoon obsession that I'm still not over.
She's really not.
No. So yeah, that was kind of funny, and I'm just trying to think, like, what my other, like, inspirations were. Like all my inspiration stories are sad, and I don't really want to tell them.
Yeah, I mean, inspiration is a really weird thing, and I think memory is a weird thing too. Like, so to remember what inspired and how it came from that.
Yeah,
is sort of an odd thing. I, like, pulled all these books, and now I don't even remember why.
You don't remember, like, what your actual inspiration was?
I remember this one, this is just very basic and not that interesting. But for Wyoming Christmas Ransom, which is one of my intrigues, I just happened upon a story about this. I think I was just researching Wyoming, or maybe even, actually, I know what it was. For the first book, I was trying to figure out if they called them medical examiners or coroners. So I was just searching coroner.
Sharon says that needs to be a quote on a t-shirt: a kitten with a Lego wheelchair turned into a panty-stealing raccoon.
Well, you have the capability of...
I do. If you guys don't know, I make t-shirts and things. So, with my Cricut. So I could make it. I could make a tote.
Okay.
Yeah, back to your coroner medical examiner.
Right now. I just Googled, like, what is it called in Wyoming, a coroner or medical examiner, and I came across this article, and it was all about this girl, and I mean girl, like, she was, like, 20, 22, I mean, she was really young, who had become, like, the first female coroner in her area, and, like, she was, like, the youngest one in Wyoming, or maybe, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what it was, but, and so, in my original pitch for my Carson's and Delaney's, the first 3 books, I had, like, a completely different third book planned. And then I, like, was just totally inspired by this young woman being a coroner. And so I came up with, like, a brand new character. And she's the heroine in Wyoming Christmas Ransom, just because of that one Google search.
I know that things like that have happened. I see, by the way, some questions about, like, my books coming up, and I'm going to answer those at the end. So if any of you have, like, questions that are about, like, things like that, I promise I will answer them at the end, so go ahead and leave them. And I think what I am notorious for, like, and what I'm terrible about is I will, like, have all of my books plotted out, like, a year in advance, and I will get to the last one and completely freak out and decide that I hate it and try to figure out how much I can change based on, like, what I have already written and what I have already revealed about a character. So Grant and McKenna are a great example of that. Cowboy Christmas Redemption, he was supposed to be with a totally different heroine. She was supposed to buy the bed and breakfast down the street. I think in a couple of books I mentioned there's a building for sale, like, down the street that used to be a bed and breakfast. Like, and so someday it'll get used, but I was setting it up to do this, like, very cowboy Hallmark movie kind of thing, like, where he was going to end up with the bed and breakfast person, and this was going to be the first person he'd been with since his wife died, and all this kind of stuff. And yet again, this all comes back to my friends basically challenging me to do things. And I was like, I'm bored. I'm so bored of this. I don't want to write this book. I don't like it at all. I've been planning it for months. Here I am about to start it. I don't want to do it. Like, I'm so not into him. I'm so not into this setup. And Megan Crane, who is also Caitlin Cruz, who's in A Cowboy for All Seasons with us, said, why can't he be a virgin widower? And I was like, because he can't. He literally can't. She was like, why would anyone in his family know that about him? And if he was caretaking his wife the whole time, like, he married this very sick person, why couldn't he be a virgin widower? And I was like, I'm immediately 1,000 times more interested in this book. Basically, if I'm bored, it's like, and I think we all do this to each other, it's like, how do you make it crazier?
Yeah.
And then you have to take that craziness and, like, ground it in reality. And I think that's where you find, like, your fun challenge. And then I decided for some reason, like the minute that the name McKenna came to me, the heroine came to me. She was completely wrong for him. And then I was like, what's, like, the opposite of an inn owner, this, like, former foster child who's, like, squatting in a cabin on his property? And so it just turned into a very different book. I think it's, like, it's one of my favorites that I've ever written. And I think that one was one of those, like, panic last minute, like, Hail Mary changes, where I was like, I think I can get away with, like, changing all these details and, like, make this story work.
I think like a whole other subset of inspiration is, like, how many times have you started a book with the wrong characters?
Yeah.
And I don't do that very often, but I do know for All I Am, which is the follow-up to All I Have, I had, I think, like, 3 different heroes for Kara before I came up with Wes, who is probably, I mean, like, people like him a lot.
He is one of my favorites of your heroes.
So, but it took me a couple of tries, and that doesn't often happen to me, but it took me a couple of tries to get the hero right for her. And I think it always happens like when you're in the
Yeah.
middle of a series because you
That's,
plan stuff out and then it
yeah.
changes.
Allison Whitman. No, that's another Allison I wrote. I've written 2 Allisons. One was in a Presents and one was in Copper Ridge. So Allison from Copper Ridge, whose last name I won't remember, she owned the bakery in the or not the bakery, she was a diner waitress in the very first cowboy book I did for HQN, and her abusive husband and Eli, the hero of that book, helping her with that, because he's the sheriff, or he's running for sheriff, is a big plot point of that book. And I knew that I wanted her to be a heroine, but I also knew that I didn't want to write her too close to what had happened to her. And I also knew that I would need a really particular hero for her. And so it wasn't until I was writing the kind of the quartet in the Copper Ridge series about the Donnelly brothers, and Kane Donnelly kind of appeared to me with that name. And I was like, it doesn't go with the other brothers' names. And I don't know why that's his name, but it is. And he was a single dad. And I just knew that he was the hero for her. Like, he was the hero I had been waiting for to put this woman with, who had been in the series for a long time, who people asked me about constantly. And, that's another, like, tangent of inspiration, is actually readers asking me about characters. Allison and Vanessa are the 2 heroines I was never going to write. I did not want to deal with Allison's abusive marriage, and I did not want to deal with Vanessa's addiction.
I would say even more Vanessa.
Even more Vanessa. I thought that I really, really, really did not think anyone would want her story.
Yeah.
I really didn't, because she is kind of the source of all of Olivia from Smooth Talking Cowboys issues, and not painted in a very good light from Olivia's point of view. And I just didn't think, and this is an example of me really selling people short, I think, is that I just didn't think she would be something that people would go, yes, I want to know her story, or I want her to have a happy ending. And so I didn't really set her up in the most flattering way. And I got more letters asking me about her than almost anyone else. And people asked me on Facebook, will Vanessa get a book? And I finally was like, I really do have to give Vanessa a book. And she is one of my favorite heroines. And I think I have gotten the most positive mail about her. And that really surprises me. Because, again, I thought that she would be too difficult of a heroine for people to kind of embrace. And she's been one that people have really, really loved. Now that I've been talking for like 10 minutes, I will say probably one of the more personal things that I can say about one of my books. And I'll just tell you guys about it because it is not something that I address in the book. He's a character that exists that I don't address. Like, it's not named in the book. So if you guys have read Want Me Cowboy, which is one of my Desire Copper Ridges, it's one of the shorter ones. The hero, Isaiah, is actually partly based on my son, who is very high functioning on the autism spectrum, and one of those people who, especially back in the day that this hero's in his 30s, he would not have ever been diagnosed. Like, it's hard enough to get him any kind of placement now, because when you're a person who doesn't fall, like, 2 of my kids are on the spectrum, one of them very firmly so, and it's pretty easy to get him help. The one that needs less actually struggles more, because he seems fine most of the time until he has like really serious struggles. And so I wrote Isaiah with that in mind. And he, so he's really based on that. That's very personal to me. And I got a very wide variety of reactions on him because, again, I chose to not. He is different. He thinks to himself. He can't read people. He can't read people's emotions. He doesn't understand what's going on sometimes. He's a very alpha hero. He's very controlling. So he does not like that, but he feels deficient in this area, and he's aware of that. And then the heroine, Poppy, is his assistant and his best friend. So she really, really understands him. But I got a lot of letters about him from people who 100% recognized him and recognized people in their lives who are like him. And it was meaningful to them because, it's their son, their grandson, and they want him to grow up and have a happy ending. And that's where it came from for me too. And so that kind of stuff is really validating because I don't often put things that are that personal like that. I guess if I do, I put a lot of personal emotions and feelings into my books for sure, and a lot of like personal realizations and bits and pieces, but very few things are that directly taken from my real life. And that was, and so it was very interesting to watch people hate him, because I was like, yeah, I know that. Like, I know that people respond to that personality because, you know, I've watched my son struggle with relationships. Like, I know people respond to that. Somebody that's that inflexible sometimes, like, in a negative way. But then also, like I said, the people who did recognize him for that. And then it was important to me that the heroine love him, not in spite of those things, but that she understand him, because those things will not change in him. Like, so yeah, anyway, that's probably like my most personal, I mean, it's definitely like my most personal inspiration. And otherwise, like, I mean, my husband and I are friends to lovers, I guess. So like anytime that's in a book, I guess that's kind of fairly derivative.
That's another, you know, we get asked a lot, like how much relationship connects, and I think, and we've talked about this before, about how like when you're reading a romance, if you're in a like good relationship, it reminds you of why you love your partner. Like,
Yeah,
it
absolutely
fills you with that same feeling, even though it's about completely different people. But it kind of just like, especially if you're maybe like mad at them for some reason, like, and then you read
never
something about how, you know, how people have worked out, it does remind you like how you feel. And I think that's more that when you're writing, it's like that process.
Yes.
It's like, I'm not basing anyone on him or our relationship necessarily, but like what I think or believe or feel about love is based on, you know, my relationship with my husband. So it's like the things that I feel about what a good relationship should look like are on the page, even though they might not look like us in any way, shape, or form.
Like, I think to like clarify that further, I think one thing that I like to write, one reason I like friends to lovers, or like best friends, older brother's best friend, and like kind of those books where, like, I think my favorite thing to write is the moment where one of them sees the other one differently for the first time, and that is fully because that's my real romance.
You had that
Even
moment.
though they're not the same, that is a feeling that I relate to really, really deeply, is like that I had this one set of feelings for this person and now I see them differently. So I find that very romantic, because that is an echo of my real life. So that is something that I, in 1,000 different ways that are nothing like the way that it happened for me, I like writing that feeling.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's why you like writing national parks or parks. Because that's where love happens in your world.
So I don't know if that's it. I just really like wide open spaces, but I did meet my husband when we were both working at a state park together. Um, but it did. But I don't know that that's why I just like settings where there's no people except the two people I've chosen.
I will say that is because I write Harlequin Presents, and like we're always supposed to do glamorous things, and it's like I think it's telling that my version of glamour is always the giant house on a private island and not really New York. Like, I'm like, I write it and I like, they'll often start there or something because it has to be like metropolitan. But I'm like, they're immediately like the one that I talked about earlier with my first Virgin Widower that I ever wrote. They're literally like in a chalet on the top of a mountain for the entire book. Like, he has to take her away to so I'm like, I like ones where, or like, my palaces are like notoriously empty. There's like one member of staff. Like, I'm like, there's nobody there. I don't like
it says about us.
I know. I was like, it says a lot about me that like even my presents are like remote. Like, my version of luxury is remote and there's no people around me. So, I mean, I consider that a good time. Just the one person that you want to be with. And like, self-isolation is basically my brand anyway. The less people, the better.
The less people, the better.
Exactly.
Add a few farm animals.
Yeah, it's all good. Do you have other like inspiration stories, or should I look at questions?
Well, so South Dakota Showdown. It's not really that. Like, intrigues are weird because I don't know. Like, especially the series, like, you really have to plan stuff out, and it's not a lot of, like, inspiration. But, the town of Bonesteel, South Dakota, is a real town. Um, that my grandma actually lived in when she was a kid. And when we went to the Badlands 2 summers ago, we drove through it. And it's like this tiny, tiny town. But I just thought the name Bonesteel was amazing, especially for an intrigue setting. So it's only in the first book pretty much. Jameson, the hero, he's like the detached officer to this little tiny town. So that wasn't really like, again, like I love using places that I connect to as settings for books.
Yeah, that is definitely like knowing you and reading like a great many of your books. Like I definitely see that, like, I think setting is like your primary groundwork, like as a writer. I tend to be like stunt setups, and then it like bites me in the butt.
That's like I have stunt dogs and then I forget about them. Never remember the damn dog.
I will just say I remember and this book's not out yet, so I can just like say it, like they lay sugar cubes out and I forgot there were dogs in the house in the book, and I don't care, and I ignored it on purpose because I wanted the sugar cubes to still be there. But you said to me, you read it and you were like, I'm sorry, but the dogs would have eaten the sugar cubes. I was like, they're very good dogs, Nicole.
I don't even remember.
And I left it because it's the magic of fiction.
Sometimes it has to be.
Yes.
Fiction. But yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. So we can do questions.
Yes. So I'm going to start with this question from, I just saw it. Where did it go? From Stephanie, because it's to both of us. Have either of you ever woken up from a dream and had to write down an idea, plot, or something about an idea for a story?
No.
I thought that I dreamed. Yeah. I thought that I dreamed like a fix to the book that I was writing last week, and woke up fully and realized it was dumb, and that I still had all the same problems that I had when I went to sleep.
My dreams are crazy. If I remember a lot of my dreams. I'm not the best sleepers. I just have weird, crazy dreams, or like really, really bland dreams, like where you're just going through your normal day. I will say that one thing that happened to me a lot as a kid is my dreams would always take place at my grandma's house. Like no matter what the dream was or who was there, like the house was her house. And like weirdly that has transferred over to my writing. When I write a house in the woods, it is my grandma's house. Like that is the setup. That is the picture I have in my head. And the same for like if I write a farm, it's my grandpa's farmhouse, which doesn't even exist anymore. Like they are just set up. That is like what I picture. I don't think that has anything to do with dreaming about them. I don't know, but mostly my dreams are just nonsense craziness.
Interesting. We talked about that, how like I think I rarely base buildings off of real places, and when I do, I struggle to remember to describe them, because if they're not real, then I'm describing them for myself, and if they are real, then I'm like forgetting because I can picture it too well without writing it down.
You have enough imagination to come up with a brand new place.
That is a lie. You have plenty of imagination. So Sharon says having too many characters can also change the story too, right? These other characters can influence things they weren't originally supposed to influence.
Absolutely.
I think anytime you're not a plotter, that becomes very true.
Yeah. And we're not.
Because you can just like make a decision and you end up going off in another direction entirely.
And it kind of depends a little bit on like how it's set up. So like when I wrote my Badlands Cop series, which is going on right now, I knew I was going to write 6 books in this series, which is the first time I've ever known that I was going to write 6 books. Like usually I know 2 or 3, and then I might get to write more. But like I knew I had to stand here and think of 6 books. And still, even planning out the couples and the storylines, I ended up changing, as I was writing South Dakota Showdown, I changed the heroines that would wind up with which heroes. and just like flip them completely because it didn't make sense as you start telling the story, things you thought were a great plan often no longer make sense.
Yes. And so Martin asked, what is our favorite character?
Wow. I don't know.
That will change depending on when you ask me because I often, like, it depends on who I'm identifying with at the time. But actually, like, and I almost never do this, but I actually just reread, like, half of Smooth Talking Cowboy because Luke Hollister will always be one of my favorite heroes. And he's not, like, a super typical hero for me either. And I love him, like, forever.
I will say that Del and Mia from All I Have are probably the characters that have taken up the most space in my brain post writing that book. Now, I will say I had to write that book twice, kind of, because I originally sold it to Harlequin E, which no longer exists. And I had sold 2 books to them. And when they closed Harlequin E, my Super Romance editor asked me if I would like to move the series to Super Romance. But what I would have to do is add 20,000 words to the first 2 books to fit the Super Romance word count. So there is a version of All I Have out there where it's like 55,000 words or 60,000 words. And then there's a version that's 80 or 85,000 words. So it is a book I spent considerable time with. That is not always true.
Yeah.
I remember another thing from All I Have that was taken from real life that's too funny to pass up.
Oh, yay. I was hoping you'd tell this story, but I didn't want to get you in trouble.
I totally forgot about it. This might be my favorite thing that I've ever done. And you can tell I'm the oldest sister from this story. But so in the book, Mia, the main character, she has a retainer because she's kind of a dork. And I was kind of trying always to find ways that she could be like. So the point of that book to me was like, even though she's like a total nerd fest and like she's so socially awkward, like the cool guy loved her anyway, like just the way she was. Kind of like what you were saying with Isaiah, like someone that was not embarrassed of her, like could just understand and love her the way she was. Anyway, so she had a retainer, which she has to put in, I think after they have sex. But
yes, for the first time.
She has to explain to him why she has a retainer, and it's because she has a migrating tooth. Because I'm so sorry. So my baby sister had a tooth that grew like in the roof of her mouth, like it was way back there. So she had to have like it pulled up, and then she had to wear a retainer so it wouldn't migrate back to the back of her mouth. And being the family that we are, we may have teased her a little bit for that. So I just couldn't resist giving one of my heroines a migrating tooth.
You guys are mean to each other because I met Nicole's mom a couple years ago now. And the first thing she said to me was, "Oh, you're real."
Yeah, she didn't believe Macy was real.
Yeah, as if I was an imaginary friend. I believe that's the first thing your husband said to me, too.
It's very possible.
Yeah, I think in your driveway.
I love language.
Said to me. Anyway, so Gloria says, hello from Levine, Arizona. Hope that you and your family are doing well. We are. She says, Macy, love your characters and stories. Waiting for West Caldwell and the other brothers' stories. Any idea when they will be out? Yes, I do. West Caldwell's book is called The Bad Boy of Redemption Ranch, and it will be out June 23rd. And then we have one of the guys in the other upcoming books is also one of Hank Dalton's children. That will kind of come, it will all be revealed as you read that trilogy. So we've got Bad Boy of Redemption Ranch coming out June 23rd. That's West's book. The Hero of Hope Springs, which is Ryder Daniels is the hero of that book, and his sister is the heroine of Bad Boy of Redemption Ranch. So you'll kind of meet that family, and that's July 21st. And then The Last Christmas Cowboy, which is my Cowboy Emma book, which was inspired by Emma, and a rewatch that I did thereof, and basically texted Nicole all caps when Jeremy Northam said, badly done, Emma, and said, I have to get this into a cowboy book. It's a lot of texting between us that causes books to happen. And so The Last Christmas Cowboy, which is out September something. End of September, last week of September. So yes, those are the upcoming cowboy books, and that is where you will get some more of Hank Dalton's indiscriminate seed.
Wow.
I'm like, Hank, I'm sick of it at this point. So but questions will be answered. So does anyone else have any more questions? Give people a second to ask questions. I just trying to think if I have like one more anecdote, even like about.
Oh, I do. Okay, I remember why I pulled these books. My Gallagher and Ivy romances, which are digital books, but I have these little giant kitties. So wrong it must be right. So bad it must be good. What I tried to do, like these are by far my sexiest books by far. And basically I tried to take like my favorite movies and mash them up together and then add like more sex. So because like there's all those great 90s comedies and they never like really give you any like actual romance novel sex. So I'm like really aware that my kids are just in the next room as I talk about this. So wrong it must be right was basically You've Got Mail, but with like sex emails instead of sweet little emails. And then So Bad It Must Be Good was While You Were Sleeping and something else. I don't remember. I mixed it up too. It was While You Were Sleeping and maybe Sabrina, but maybe not. I don't know. It was a mashup of two like romantic comedies that I loved and tried to make it like a more like sexier version of those very chaste 90s rom-coms.
So Luann asks, do you ever write about older romances, meaning 50s or grandparents?
Didn't you have a secondary romance in one of your...
Well, I do. My women's fiction has a romance for the mother who's in her 60s. And the hero is pretty much Sam Elliott. So I think we're all here for that. And I did, I am actually writing in my Gold Valley Vineyard series a little bit of a long running background secondary romance with the parents of the like respective families, which is a little weird, but they had a past love and ended up not together. So that, and then this is kind of them in the background getting their happy ending. So no, never as the primary couple. I also did a presents where that was part of a series, like an 8-book series where the grandfather was kind of tracking down his lost love and he was in his 90s. So I've had it in the background, but never as the primary.
But didn't you have an older couple, or maybe they were just divorced, like in your Silver Creek?
Oh, yeah, no, I did. They were just having problems, I think.
Oh, okay.
Because they were together at they were a little older. Yeah. So I did, you're right. They are one of my favorite secondary romances, actually. She was kind of like, because they're not the primary romantic couple, and she had somebody at work who was flirting with her, and she was feeling like a little dissatisfied, and he finds out about it, and then they reconnect. Like, it's kind of the way. She doesn't do anything, but it's kind of the way, and she's not going to. She doesn't intend to, but she's realizing that she's missing that. It was vaguely women's fiction-esque, actually,
Yeah.
for all that time ago. Yeah, I did.
Do you remember?
Huh?
Title?
That was in... I want to say that was in Unexpected. Unless it was in... It wasn't in Larkin Quinn's book, was it?
I don't think so.
No,
I think
not in Untouched. So, yeah, I believe it was in Unexpected, which is only available digitally. And Martin also asks, what do you read?
Each other.
Yeah, a lot of each other. And also I read a lot of historical romance. And I just started reading Nora's J.D. Robb series, and I am going to start reading Nighthawk by Beverly Jenkins this week because it is my Romance Book Club's book pick. I run a romance book club with Megan Crane, and normally we meet at our local independent bookstore, but we will be meeting on Zoom this month.
I've been rereading a lot of Nora because that's my go-to comfort happy read. Just constant Nora, and there's so many, so I can.
Yes, yeah. My comfort read that's sitting on the nightstand ready to go is Chasing Cassandra by Lisa Kleypas, because Lisa Kleypas could write me the phone book and I would read it in her voice. So
Yeah,
that
she's
is
amazing.
basically, yeah.
I love that. Was a good book.
Yep, all the Lisa Kleypas basically works for me. So that is sitting there ready to go, and yeah, need comfort reads at the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I read so much of what like you're writing and what Megan and Jackie are writing, and you guys write so fast that ends up being a lot of my reading. But I'm smug because I get to read it first, and like I know that when we do Good Old Fashioned Cowboy, we'll be reading each other's stuff as we write, and that ends up being kind of a consuming reading situation. But I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and it helps us make it.
Yeah, that's how it ends up all fitting together. So, well, thank you guys once again for tuning in and listening to us talk. We'll be back again on Tuesday. If you have any suggestions for topics, feel free to leave them in the comments here because we are actively seeking.
Yeah, we are running out.
We are running out of ideas. Where do we get our inspiration? Hopefully from your comments. So, yeah, feel free to leave us some suggestions of what you'd like to hear us talk about. We have covered baking, TV, movies, family stories, books, and yeah, are actively seeking other suggestions. So thanks once again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.